All right, we're live now. Oh, I have with me Dr. Breck.
Good evening, Otto. How are you?
Good. Let me now. I have fixed the sound. I knew there was something wrong. And then we get to the sound check, see if anybody in the audience can hear us.
My one viewer says she can hear us.
All right. Well, my one viewer can hear us too. Well, it says there's three viewers.
Okay.
All right. All right. I got another one. I got somebody from all the way from New York City.
Awesome.
All right. So I have with me Dr. Breck, and the name you write under is Paul Bingham.
Well, that is my name. Dr.
Oh, that
Breck.
is your real name. Okay,
Dr.
I
Breck
wasn't sure.
is my pseudonym.
All right, right. And so you were uh, written a collection of four short stories, I believe,
Yeah.
and a few other books, but that seemed to be the one that most interested the literary reviewers.
Well, after that one kind of bombed, and poor Chip lost money on the book. And then my second book, which came out on Ann Sterzinger's imprint, also attracted zero attention, and that derailed my literary career. So that was the end of that. But I did was several people were kind enough to review my first book, which was Down Where the Devil Don't Go.
Right, which has the introduction by Andy Nowicki.
Yes.
Yes, who is well known to my few viewers here since he's been on the show a number of times, including fairly recently to talk about my latest book.
Yeah.
Uh,
Andy is maybe someday he'll become a Catholic saint. He is a man of great character, I think.
he is. I think you know what's going to happen is 50 years after we're all dead, they'll be assigning his books to any what remains of any literature classes being held in caves or something by by people by torchlight.
Well, either that or they'll be using them to educate people and say this is how bad things got before we turned things around.
Well, there we go. That'd be kind of a Brave New World scenario. In the old days, people did things like give live birth to children.
Yeah, it was they were very benighted times.
Yes. Uh, so you haven't been doing any literature since the second book
No, I've been writing quite a bit. I just haven't bothered to publish anything. My
because there's
most
no money
recent
in
Yeah, there's
it.
no money. Moreover, there's no audience for my most recent work. I've been doing an extensive, maybe a document. I wouldn't call it a book on Dr. John Salmon Ford, who is, I don't know if you're familiar with him.
No.
Uh, John John Salmon Ford was a very influential figure in the state of Texas. He was he was both a doctor, a lawyer, a surveyor, a politician, a Civil War general, and a Texas Ranger. And he was also ended up being like a conservative politician in Texas in the 1800s, and a
Okay.
historian as well. So he was a very formidable figure at that period of time in the between eight.
Which
Sorry, sorry. Go ahead.
where did he fight in the Civil War? Because I don't remember his name from the West, so he must have fought somewhere east of New Mexico.
No, he fought in Texas and New Mexico and Mexico.
Oh, really?
His as John Ford. His nickname was Rip Ford, and
Okay, I'll have to look him up.
he has a very interesting background because see the Confederate cabinet, Jefferson Davis and so forth and so on, didn't like him, so he was only a brevet or a brevet brigadier general, but he actually fought the last battle of the Civil War and he won it. So
Okay.
very interesting but obscured figure. And this is
Well,
why
he doesn't come up in the main narratives on
exactly.
the war here in New Mexico, which is mostly about Glorieta Pass.
Yeah, exactly. He's been obscured from a lot of accounts, but he was a very formidable figure and very well known in his day. And so I've
Okay.
been doing quite a bit of work on that because his memoirs were actually curated by a Marxist professor in the University of Texas, and I thought that was a travesty because and this you
Are
see,
there any professors at University of Texas who aren't Marxist?
well, I assume they all are, but the deal is, a lot of history and a lot of memoirs of a lot of famous people have been curated and edited and basically revised by Marxist professors in these universities. And what's consequently happened is that we're unable to obtain original documentation on a lot of this. They basically hoard a lot of this information. Now, you can go yourself to the archives, obviously, which I've done in the past and study for yourself, but they're very it's hard to obtain uh, access to a lot of documentation anymore.
I'm aware of those problems. In fact, there's a whole chapter in my book about dealing with archives in the former Soviet Union.
Yeah, the whole atmosphere has changed because I was researching in at Baylor College in like 2007, and going back to that time, it seems like a paradise. It was a wonderful, comparative to today. We thought it was terrible at the time because we were protesting the war and Ron Paul, supporting Ron Paul for president and all that. But it was actually a great time. They had a elderly lady who was the librarian at the Baylor Library or Archives, and she was just she's retired now, but she was just full of help, and you could just work there all day, and they were helpful and very nice and polite, and it's a totally different situation today, dealing with the next generation of librarians and archivists and so forth and so on.
Yeah, I got a lot of stuff out of Moscow for my last book, but I don't think they're going to be letting Americans in the next couple of years. The hostility of the U.S. government over the issue of the intervention in Ukraine, I think, has made us not so welcome among archival institutions in the Russian Federation.
And probably, I would imagine.
All right, so um, yeah, so you like every other writer having trouble, and we kind of live in a post-literate world, unfortunately, uh,
Yeah.
for all of us. Uh, what else have you been up to besides the day job? So I mean, reading the interview, you were talking about dissident activities, particularly raising money for a sovereign citizen. Are you involved in any such activities now that you be willing to talk about, or no?
No, I was trying to now. Pastor Lindstedt is not a sovereign citizen, for the record.
Okay.
I have done stuff for sovereign citizens, even though I'm not a sovereign citizen, and I kind of think some of their behavior is self-destructive. But mostly, I basically donate my own money, and I don't try to get money from other people to give to people who need it. So I talk about activisms. It's kind of a joke, but not really. In that, there are only so many people left who know about stuff, and there's only so many people left that have libraries. I inherited a couple of libraries from, elderly people in these circles, and trying to keep those books together is a big activity in itself, and trying to nobody's ever going to read them maybe, but might as well. I expect the Irish monks felt much the same in the dark ages, so
There's a guy who just died in Germany. He had a collection in
I
his
saw
house
that.
of 70,000 books.
Yeah, that was a amazing example of German ingenuity, the way he
Stored them.
stored them in his rafters.
Yeah. And sometimes it surprises. I'm not sure if you're familiar. There's a professor of South Asian languages at University of Minnesota, M.A.R. Barker. But when he died, he had a huge collection of revisionist and white nationalist literature that nobody knew about in his personal library, and it freaked out all the people in charge of the estate.
Really,
Yeah,
people are really
he wrote The Serpent's Walk under a pseudonym, but it wasn't made public till last year that he was the actual author.
really. I'm gonna have to look that up.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Uh,
I had a one of the libraries that I inherited had a number of revisionist history books, and as revisionist books or about the Holocaust and such, they often have pictures on the dust cover of Hitler, and having multiple books with pictures of Hitler on them used to freak out one of my exes. Just having those pictures in of those books in the house.
really? Okay.
Yeah,
Um,
she couldn't read.
because the normie books
It
all
was
have pictures of Hitler on the back too. It
well,
doesn't seem to be
she couldn't read, but it just bothered her.
no.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm sure she could read. She could read road signs and stuff like that, but she was virtually illiterate, and but just the pictures bothered her.
No, okay. Yeah, so yeah, you look up M.A.R. Barker, which is short for Muhammad Abdul Rahman. He changed his name from Philip when he converted to Islam in 1951. But
Really?
he was a long time professor of Urdu and Baluchi and some other languages at the University of Minnesota, and wrote Serpent's Walk under a pseudonym, and it didn't become public till last year. But yeah, evidently when he died, his estate had a whole library of forbidden literature.
That's fascinating. I had no idea. So you just never know with some people, do you?
No, but the thing is, he didn't like really. I mean, he didn't. He compartmentalized his life. So I have a video on him, and I wrote a short Substack on him. But he didn't even really try to hide it because he was actually one of the advisors on the editorial board of the Journal for Historical Review. It says Philip Barker, PhD, Minnesota. So I mean, who else would it be?
If you're low key about certain things, people will just let you slide right on by.
I guess so.
And on the
What
other,
what got me is that they all freaked out like last year when it became public, and I'm like, this guy is long-term Orientalist, convert to Islam, involved in study of esoterica and occult and all kinds of strange stuff. Why would you think him being interested in National Socialism would be kind of out there? Because these things kind of like all go together. People that are interested in one fringe subject often have other fringe interests.
well, I would assume that most people weren't interested in his interests, and that's why they didn't notice what was going on. Be
Probably,
a lot of
but
people.
interesting story though.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to definitely look that up more. I vaguely remember Serpent's Walk, but I didn't put that all together.
Yeah, he wrote it under a pseudonym. I can't remember what it was. It's actually the name of one of his distant ancestors. Um, but yeah, he was known for other things. Uh, Academically, particularly for South Asian languages, because when I was in London at School of Oriental and African Studies, they were still using textbooks he had written in the '60s for Urdu.
Really?
Yeah.
That's fascinating. So, when you were going to school, did you take Urdu? Was that one of the languages?
No, no, no.
Okay.
I don't know any. Well, I don't know how you count. Um, when I did my graduate studies, I convinced them that because it was widely spoken in the Asian parts of the Soviet Union that Russian was an Asian language, an Oriental language, and that was the one I needed for my research, and I already knew it, so that's how I got away with that. Uh, Otherwise, I probably would have not. I wouldn't have studied Urdu. I probably would have studied Turkish, but they let me get away with Russian since all of the Asian peoples of the Soviet Union speak it fluently, or at least did. So it's kind of fading in some of the rural areas. But uh, last time I was there, 2021, everybody's still speaking Russian. So
Yeah. So, what brought you back to the United States, if I may ask?
I got a job, but it didn't work out. So uh, my last gig as a university lecturer was in northern Iraq in the Kurdish region, and they didn't renew my contract. So then I came back to the U.S. and got locked down during COVID and finished writing this last book. But I had a fair amount of savings from working in Iraq, but it only lasted about the 2 years. So then I had to go back to Kyrgyzstan to renew my daughter's U.S. passport at the embassy. And so I did that, and I got a job at another university, one run by the Assemblies of God, the Pentecostals, but it didn't pay much. So I'm still looking for other jobs. I don't know. I must have been applying to like 24 jobs on the internet every day while I was in Bishkek. And I got one. I don't even remember applying for it, but I got a job to be a middle school teacher here in Carlsbad, New Mexico. And they interviewed me because the 12-hour time was in the middle of my night. But I must have been okay because, relaxed enough that they called me the next day and they gave me the job.
Oh,
So
wow.
I went back to the U.S. and I lasted 7 months as a middle school teacher. Almost had 2 heart attacks. And then they asked me to resign and gave me a generous severance package. But since I'd already been set up here, and I kind of just looked for jobs here, and I got one at the local big grocery store as a cashier. And then after a couple of months, the main morning janitor quit, and so they asked me if I'd like to take his job. It'd be guaranteed 40 hours a week, and so I did that.
I see. So, do you like living in New Mexico?
I like it better than California, which was where I was during the COVID lockdown.
Yeah. I like New Mexico very much, but just mostly for the open country, the mountains, and so forth.
Yeah, well, I'm in the southeastern corner between Texas and Chihuahua, so there's not too many mountains down here.
Yeah, you're in the lower desert area.
Yeah, I'm in the Permian Basin.
Yeah.
Where the oil and gas and potash.
Yeah, absolutely. So, are you contemplating going overseas again?
Only if I could find them, but those jobs have really dried up. I mean, I just got a rejection today from University of Texas. They had a position specifically for the history of the Soviet Union. They said they had 140 applicants.
Oh, wow.
So if there are 140 people with PhDs and books published on just Soviet history, it's not and that's just one position. There's not much of a chance of getting anything. I mean, I'm over 50 now, so I'm not thinking that I'll be able to get a job again in higher education. I never had one in the U.S. I worked in Kyrgyzstan, and then I worked in Ghana, and then I worked in Iraq for a total of about 12 years.
Which was your favorite? Which was your
I actually really like Ghana because it was a real university. It had been set up by the British in 1948, and then Ghana got its independence in 57, but the university was still part of the British University of London system until 1961. But they still pretty much kind of the ghost of British colonialism still running things. So it actually worked out well. Whereas American University of Central Asia was a Soros operation, and American University of Iraq Suleimania was pretty much a CIA operation. There wasn't much concern for anything academic. It was just basically I was just basically the like the cook in the pizza parlor that makes no money because it's just laundering money for the mob.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's very interesting. I imagine it's at least warmer down there in southern New Mexico at this time.
Yeah, it's pretty warm. It doesn't get as hot here as it did in Iraq, but
Yeah.
it still gets pretty hot. 109 degrees was the average this summer.
Oh well. Yeah, I've been thinking about spending some winters in New Mexico and southern Texas, but I haven't got around to it yet.
Well, we're close to the caverns. That's our big tourist thing.
Uh,
And not sure what else we have nearby here. But we do get a lot of people that come from particularly Texas to go see the caverns.
yeah. Yeah, it's beautiful country down there though, south of Albuquerque.
Yeah, we're way south of that. I'm actually only 160 miles north of Juarez.
Yeah.
So what's that? So not anywhere. It's near Albuquerque. I had to actually fly from Albuquerque to here. The
Oh
little
wow.
tiny plane.
Way south of
Um,
Albuquerque.
yeah, we're our closest big city actually in terms of being able to get there fastest um, are Lubbock, which is 3 hours, and then what's the city across from Juarez on the Texas side?
El
El
Paso.
Paso. We're
Yeah.
close to. It's about a 2 hour drive to El Paso.
It's funny that you mentioned the border there too. One of the other not exactly books, but I wrote an essay on what was the guy's name? I wrote an essay on the influence of the Border Patrol veterans on the politics in the 1970s, and namely in their taking over the NRA, which was becoming a basically WASP kind of. It was no longer being opposing gun control for a while, and this clique of retired border patrolmen from down in that area decided to basically take over the NRA at the convention and turn it in a more pro-gun direction, which it became for a long period of time. Now it's more not exactly as pro-gun as it used to be, but it was a powerful activist organization for a long time under them. So that's a very interesting story. I also have an essay on that I haven't published.
Yeah, I lived for a while between getting my PhD and going to Kyrgyzstan in Aravaca, Arizona, which literally is on the border with Sonora.
Yeah,
I was there 2 years, and the border patrol were all over. Um, that, but it was kind of interesting. They didn't seem to be as effective as you would think. So one of the things you would see is that there would be like sometimes the whole family would run out of water crossing.
yeah,
So they'd want to turn themselves in, and you'd go down the block and inform La Migra, the group family, that want to turn themselves in. And they need water, and then you'd come back 5 hours later, and they're still in the same spot they were. They hadn't picked them up yet.
yeah. Yeah, it was not a very efficient organization. This, the period of the heyday of the Border Patrol was the 30s through the 60s when they were having running gunfights with the smugglers back in those days. From the Depression era
Okay.
and through the 60s, and then more recently they've no longer been like an active paramilitary force.
My favorite thing is you would find a couple of young Mexican guys dressed quite well, and they would speak no English, and they'd come up to you and say, "Donde está la migra?" And you're looking like these guys are well dressed, there's no sweat, and want to turn themselves in. It turns out these are drug smugglers. They'd come up from Nogales, drop off their load, and then get a free ride back from the Border Patrol back to Nogales to pick up the next load of narcotics to ship back into the U.S.
Oh yeah, yeah. The people don't realize that about all the meth in the United States comes from Mexico now.
It doesn't. They were
Yeah,
still making some in southern Arizona when I lived there. There was some guy was making in a trailer right next to the fire department, and
yeah,
then blew himself up. Well,
yeah.
fortunately, the fire department was close and could put out the fire.
That's handy. Yeah, it's been in the last 10 years or so, 10, 15
Okay, this was
years.
back in 2005.
Yeah,
So
that at that period of time, yeah, that was the big era of meth cooking. But
yeah,
since 2010, the Mexican meth has overwhelmed the American cooks.
okay.
And
Here, the big thing that comes through from Mexico, well, most of it goes much further, is fentanyl.
oh yeah, well yeah, and all the meth is cut with fentanyl now. That's what they cut it with. And so, yeah, you can get pure fentanyl, or if you're wanting meth, you're going to get meth cut with fentanyl, whether you like it or not.
Uh, don't do any of those things. So.
Well, yeah. I'm just saying that if you buy meth, they cut it, dilute it with fentanyl. So a lot of people have gotten addicted to fentanyl while trying to do meth. So it's kind of a worse situation than one could imagine.
Yeah. But again, I think we're just a transit point because we're so small. It's not really a market here.
Yeah.
Uh, uh, all right, so who is of the old guard? I would say alternative right or pre-alternative right. I guess the people that are. I'm trying to think of a word here that would kind of encompass it. Who's kind of the figure you find the most interesting?
I like Thomas 777. I think he's a really smart guy. I always enjoyed his work since about 2007, 2006. And he was really sharp back in the day when he was like in his early 30s. He was really sharp, sharper than he is now. But of course, he was abusing steroids and drugs at that time. And, fortunately, his mind is not completely gone. But I think his work uh, his work is very formidable and will continue to be so. He's been able to kind of put everything together because he's versed in all the old material from like the Institute for Historical Review, I think it's called IHR, going back to that time, and more recent
Was Mark
review.
Faber?
Yeah, with more recent. I'm just talking about he is able to kind of bridge the gap between two generations of revisionism, and so he's accomplished a lot, I think, and I think he's the most sincere and most productive of the minds that have emerged in the last 20 years.
Okay.
Everybody else is a grifter.
Even Andy?
No, Andy's not a grifter, but Andy
Okay.
doesn't get much traction, and that's not his fault. But people, I think a lot of people have sidelined Andy, unfortunately, and that's not good. That's just what's happened, and it's unfortunate. He got a lot of traction on what was my posting career, he had a good fan base on my posting career, but my posting career went under in 2019, and he doesn't have. He's been marginalized quite a bit, unfortunately, and he doesn't have an aggressive personality like Thomas to basically exert his will on his enemies. So he's got the Catholic morality, and that's awesome. But I'm just saying that Andy is not in a position where he can kind of get away from where he's at right now, unfortunately.
Okay. Um,
I
yeah,
hope
he's
I hope he does. I hope he gets out of it, but he's kind of like he's let people put him in a little box and put him in a corner, and he needs to get out of that box, get out of the corner.
all
Easier
right.
said than done.
Yeah. Well, I mean, also as again, he's primarily a literary figure, which in 21st century America is not conducive to having a large fan base.
Yeah, I'm speaking moreover of the people who and I talked about Colin whatever Liddell or whatever his name is.
Yes,
These
Colin
people
Liddell.
basically stuck knives in his back, and they're
Yeah, yeah.
and
Both Spencer and Liddell stabbed Nowicki in the back.
when Spencer shut down Alternative Right, the website, it shocked me. It's like one morning you click on it and it's gone, and that initial what he did to Nowicki after Nowicki sacrificed a lot more than most people, and that's what's truly tragic because he has sacrificed everything in his life. A lot of people, I kind of, came up very young in this movement, and I kind of knew how to live. I knew I was going to have to live a certain way in order to function in society. But people who already had families and bank accounts and so forth and so on, they lost an immense amount of their life. And then you have people like Liddell, who's ensconced in Canada,
No, he's
getting.
in Japan.
I think he's in Canada.
Really?
Yeah,
He always claimed he was living in Japan.
I think he's in Canada though. I think that's one of his subterfuges. That's
Oh,
subterfuge on his part. I think he's in Canada. I think he's getting a stipend from. I don't know what organization. It might be the ADL. It might be the Southern Poverty Law Center. But I think he gets a stipend to write and cause or disrupt the rightist circles. And I don't believe he's been in Japan for a number of years, if ever. And I don't
okay.
believe he's with his Japanese wife anymore either.
Okay. I don't know. I know very little about him. I don't particularly have a high opinion of him. He strikes me as oh, I don't know, but he's. I thought it was funny that when I talked to Andy about this, Andy Nowicki sent a letter to the ADL asking that Colin Liddell be removed from their list of anti-Semites because he was clearly 100% normie.
Yeah. And see, that's the kind of Christian act Andy would do. He's looking out for his enemy. He's trying to do a good act for his enemy, and that's something I personally would not do. I would tell him I would write to them and tell them that Colin was a bigger anti-Semite than I was. But and then you look at Spencer, who hasn't lost anything. He hasn't missed any meals. He got his trust fund, and he just kept living his life. Andy is the odd man out. Andy is the guy that suffered because he put it all on the line, and neither of them put anything on the line. And so that's very unfortunate that it happened that way. I know he is a better Christian than I, because I would be very bitter about how things worked out, and probably seeking vengeance. I
Uh, well, I mean, he does have something going for him, regardless. I mean, he's despite his marriage breaking up, he still has a good relationship with his two kids, which are who are now young adults. So,
Well, that's awesome. But in terms of, and I've harassed Liddell for years. I've cyberbullied Liddell for like 7 or 8 years. He won't even respond to me anymore. Uh, but for years he would, and he even brought up my book. He hadn't read my book, but he said, "Oh, you wrote this degenerate book." And how do you know it's degenerate? I wrote the book as a satire of degeneracy to attack degeneracy. I didn't write it to be degenerate, and but that was Liddell's uneducated ri- riposte to me that, oh, you wrote a degenerate book and this and that. Never read the book, didn't know anything about it, just read a review of it or something like that, and was trying to make a comeback at
oh,
me.
I did notice in one of the interviews with you, you said you'd never read Jim Thompson, whom I'm going to recommend, even though Jim Thompson was an actual member of the Communist Party.
You know,
So, so was Dashiell Hammett. But his first book, Now on Earth, which is not noir, it's kind of semi-biographical,
yeah.
is where I would start, and then I would go read The Killer Inside Me, which
You
was
know,
his first big hit.
I don't really read anymore, but I mean fiction. But if I do run across a Jim Thompson book, I will read it. I it
They're
was
quite short. It won't
Yeah.
take you long.
I know one of my favorite movies is The Getaway, and I know it deviates from the plot of Thompson's book,
The
but
book is much better,
yeah,
but The Getaway is not his best book.
yeah. But I do enjoy that movie. It was a good movie. I know it's different, way different plot than the book, but that's my only encounter with Thompson. I like Charles
You never
Willeford.
saw The Grifters? That was based on a book by him too.
No, I haven't.
That's a better movie with Angelica Houston, I think.
I'm gonna have to check that out. Yeah,
And
but
he also, I didn't see the movie, but I read the book After Dark, My Sweet, also based on one of his books. And he wrote the screenplay for a movie about World War One. I can't remember what it was. I'll have to look it up. But he was quite prolific in the 1950s and 60s. And then after about the mid 60s, he kind of stopped writing because reality was far more degenerate than what he was writing.
yeah, I think a lot of those guys kind of hit a wall. Things were getting too bad.
Well, I mean, I remember when I would left Sacramento, I had almost all of the Black Lizard reprints in the 90s of Jim Thompson's work that I had bought from Tower Books. And I gave them to my uncle, who became fascinated with them because he said, this is like an insight into the mind of the people living on Skid Row.
Yeah, yeah, it's very interesting. It's very interesting. I haven't, like I said, I haven't read Jim Thompson, but I've read a number of Black Lizard uh, writers, published writers. I think it's Black Lizard was the imprint, right?
Yeah, yeah, they were the imprint for the noir
Yeah.
novels, mostly 40s and 50s, I think, period of time. And they reissued a huge number in the 1990s. It was kind of a revival.
Yeah, I read all of. That's how I read all of Dashiell Hammett, uh, his books. They
Yeah, I
were,
like Dashiell Hammett,
yeah,
The Glass Key,
yeah.
of course, The Maltese Falcon, which is actually a decent movie, although it, again, not the same as the book.
I like all of his Continental Ops stories. Red
Those are
House
good.
is great. Those were very influential on me. Uh, Charles Willeford was another writer.
Yeah, if you like Hammett, I think you would like the Thompson.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. I just, like I say, I hardly ever read fiction anymore. But if I do read anything, I definitely will read Thompson. I try to. Well, honestly, I don't have time. It's either you do
Well,
some.
his first book, Now and on Earth, is only semi-fictional.
Yeah, I
So, and there's a really good biography of him by called Savage Art. I think the author is Pereiro. It
yeah,
came out in the '90s as well. But that he describes the whole milieu when he was in Oklahoma with uh, the other members of the public writers project. I'm trying to think of was it Louis L'Amour was in it, was one of his associates, and also oh, I can't remember who else, but he if that's another interesting book if you're interested in the kind of writing scene in the 1930s and 40s.
absolutely. It's that'd be definitely a book I would like to read. I don't know if you ever read the blog Two Blowhards back in the day, but
Uh,
they
I
used
might have.
it was Ray Sawhill's blog. Ray Sawhill
I don't know.
was, but anyway, they used to review a lot of those books, and that's how I came into contact with a lot of those noir type books. Besides having read a bunch from the '90s, the Black Lizard imprint
Yeah,
in libraries.
back when. Well, I bought them, but back then books were a lot cheaper.
Yeah. Well, I used to go to the library and get 22 books at a time, get a stack this high.
Well,
And,
my library only let me check out 10 at a time.
oh wow.
I
I don't.
can't carry that many home, anyways.
Yeah, I used to be a fairly decent speed reader, so I could read and retain a book fairly decently. But that was about 8 concussions ago, so I don't know if I can do that anymore.
Yeah, I doubt you could do it even with the. When I was in my early 30s, I could go through about 500 pages of dense nonfiction a day.
Yeah,
But there's now if I could get 100 done in a day, it's an accomplishment.
yeah. Well, I've been taking smart drugs for many years, and they definitely help you with your attention span and your comprehension span. I've
What
been
I found helped me when I was having to grade stupid undergrad papers was smoking nargila.
really,
But yeah, but the way in the Middle East they do the tobacco is they put it in with some sort of syrup. It used to be molasses, but I think now they just use a sugar syrup with the fruit. But anyway, that's just like smoking pure tar, evidently. So it blocked off an artery on the right side of my chest, and I had to have a stint put in and quit smoking forever.
so
So no more nicotine.
you wouldn't recommend the hookah then?
Oh, I recommend it for all kinds of reasons, but the only downside is that it will kill you.
Yeah, that's the downside.
um, but yeah, it's a lot worse for your circulatory system than other ways of imbibing tobacco.
Yeah, I've been taking the Russian drug paracetam for about 15 years now, and it definitely has helped my writing and comprehension quite a bit. And I recommend it to people all the time, but not many people. It's hard to get it now. It's banned in the U.S. because of the, I'm sure because of the whole difficulty with Russia. But it's quite a useful drug and has virtually no side effects. It's just basically increases your comprehension and attention span.
Yeah, I don't. The economy in New Mexico is based on selling marijuana to people coming across from Texas.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, there's the only reason I haven't moved to New Mexico is I don't think I could make as much money down there.
It's a poor state. We have a worse Gini coefficient than Oaxaca, which is the most unequal state in all of Mexico.
Really?
Yes. So the GDP of New Mexico itself is the same as Germany, but the Gini coefficient is worse than Oaxaca, which means there's a small group of very, very rich people, and then most of the remaining population, like myself, are extremely poor.
Well, I think that's going to be the inevitable outcome for all the states over a period of time within the next couple of decades. Uh, and so, I expect people need to get used to that way of living. So you're kind of ahead of the curve. Getting accustoming yourself to the new reality.
I guess.
But you referenced the white working class, and I've seen over the last, I used to be actively involved in politics quite a bit, and I stopped doing that for the same reason I don't publish anymore. Is I don't see an audience, and I don't see a political class uh, anymore of people who are capable of engaging in politics. And I see the white working class being systematically subjected to a genocide right now. And partially it's meth and partially it's other causes. So I really think they're very, a very dying force at this period of time.
Yeah, that's not in good shape.
I don't see too much hope for it. Obviously, anything is possible. They say while there's life, there's hope. But what I see happening is that eventually, as I said, they're going to eliminate any middle class and have a large number or a small number of wealthy people in every state and a large number of poor people, and that will be the new economic reality for the most part.
All right, I'm living in the future.
Yeah, yeah, that's what I meant. Yeah, and I think that's just inevitable. I think what we're seeing right now in a lot of states is that the land is all being bought up by individuals or corporations, and it will eventually, be like England, wherein what is it, 90% of the land is owned by a handful of people, and that it's a systematic process. It's not even it's basically a matter of course at this point. I don't see any turning the tide on that in terms of land ownership. It's going to be almost impossible for people to own land, insofar as it already is very difficult with the property taxes and so forth and so on.
Uh, well, I don't own any land, so
I don't either. I haven't tried to. I haven't tried to accrue any possessions whatsoever, and but I do see this as what's going on in the world right now. I
I
do have
have.
the books.
Yeah.
That's a possession.
I actually don't have too many books because I moved in here. I haven't acquired too many. Some people have sent me books. It takes a long time for the mail here, though.
Yeah, yeah. The only reason I have a house right now, like an actual house, is to house the books because I can live in a lot of different places. I don't need a house, but the books have to be kept in a temperature controlled environment.
Not necessarily. When I worked in Ghana, the books were not kept in any type of temperature or humidity controlled environment, and they all looked really bad. Like I would hold up a book and I'd say to my students, "Which do you think is older, me or the book?" And I'd look and I said, "The book, obviously. It looked like it's 100 years old. No, this book is only 30 years old, and I'm almost 50."
Wow. Well, I do want to preserve these books, and they've already been subjected to enough brutality in their lives. So I'm trying to do the best I can by them.
Yeah, and then the insects would eat the books, of course, in the
Yeah.
tropics too. So you'd occasionally open a book and there'd be a stamp on it that said, "Be careful when handling. This book has been treated with some sort of chemical." Sometimes it actually said DDT, I think.
Oh wow. Yeah, I wouldn't want to touch that book. Have to wear surgical gloves to peruse it.
But yeah, the books were not in good shape at the University of Ghana because there was no temperature, or even worse, no humidity control. I mean, the high humidity just destroys books too.
Yeah, yeah. It's very unfortunate. I never really could get into reading stuff online or these Kindles or e-readers or I like to have a physical book.
Oh, I do too. The problem is, of course, if you're traveling from continent to continent,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
you can have a 10-pound laptop can carry, you know, hundreds of books that
Yeah.
you've scanned into PDFs. So with the number of physical books you can carry is very limited, and
Oh
they
yeah.
keep making it more limited on international flights. The
Yeah.
weight keeps getting reduced.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, I understand that. But it's very unfortunate, but we have to keep up what we got.
All right. Uh, so, any plans for? I guess you don't have any plans for any more publishing in the near future, do you?
Well, I absolutely have a lot of plans that I can snap my fingers and make happen as soon as the proper circumstances emerge. When I first released my first book, I said I wanted to do a opera based on Mein Kampf, and
Okay.
yes, and I actually was working with a composer on this opera, believe it or not, and it was we were actually off to the races. He had actually composed some of the music, and I was supposed to be working on obviously the lyrics and so forth to some of these compositions, and he was one of those guys that write television jingles for advertising and so forth and so on. So he was good at generating music. And unfortunately, at that period of time, I wasn't good at generating content because it was like 2014 or whatever. And but no, I would definitely bring that project back if I had any opportunity. Honestly, I'm sitting on a lot of content. Um, I've got content going back to 2005 that has never seen the light of day, unfortunately, and probably never will. But I've got plenty of stuff to come out. I probably will do like I'll probably do like a live publication of my work on Rip Ford in that I'm going to basically memorize or make footnotes of the whole book, and then I'll do like a 4 or 5 hour study on YouTube on the book, where I basically declaim most of the book or, you know, talk about the book, summarize the book in that fashion in about 3 or 4 YouTube videos and just put it out there because it's never going to be published, obviously. And that's the book I was going to do on John Ford. So that's one thing that I'm going to come out with. And I don't, like I said, I'm ready to do stuff. It just I just need an audience, and I need some money. I need resources to do stuff with. There's a lot of things I would like to do. I'd like to make movies, insofar as that goes. I have some stories that could function as screenplays. They're already written out. The dialogue's all there. This is something Cormac McCarthy did quite a bit, and that's how he got his books made into movies so easily. He wrote them so basically to function as screenplays, and you know, he's kind of an inspiration in the sense that I don't really care for his work, but he definitely got published late in life. He got famous late in life, and so. But yeah, I have about 10 short stories, 2 novels that could come out. I have several nonfiction history books that could come out. I thought about doing some self-help work as well. I have what I call the Maoist Guide to Entrepreneurship, and I took it down off YouTube. But basically, the Maoist Guide to Entrepreneurship is a self-help book to show you how to succeed as an entrepreneur using Maoist guerrilla tactics in the modern world.
What's up, James?
Jonathan Otto Cole, thank you for sending me the link. Dr. Breck, haven't spoken to you before, but I've seen your channel a few times. I think you're a really interesting guy.
Thank you, sir. How are you this evening?
Pretty good. I'm off from work, but thought you guys were talking about some interesting stuff. As for the Maoist Guide to Entrepreneurship, does any of this have to do with? Does any part of that book have large suitcases full of $100 bills going under the table to the Maoists to enact a Western agenda, or is that
no? Basically, it's a lot of people think of business as just business, whereas in today's society, it's warfare, and you have to treat it somewhat as warfare, And yes, that might involve bribing your local officials, but or doing favors for them in some way, in exchange for favors they do for you, But it's basically attacking the libertarian idea of, I'm going to be a capitalist and do things all above board and accomplish things. And a lot of these self-help books are actually written by people who were born wealthy or born with trust funds and accomplished things. So, I basically started out with with nothing, and I have most of it still, and not all, but I have some of it, and I have, so that's basically I'm showing people how to start from nothing and basically try to accomplish a little something.
Well, yeah, I'll being a little facetious. I'm not in a very dissimilar situation to yourself. I was not born a trust fund baby. I am not, a social peer of Richard Spencer or any of those sort of people, or any of those people who pay off their mortgage by 28, but they fail to mention that, they have a 6-figure salary at their uncle's tech firm. You know what I mean? They claim that the secret to success is meditation and herbal tea, but it's really a 6-figure salary and living at home until you have enough to buy your dream house. But as far as economics being warfare, I'm not hearing you guys a few minutes ago when I was requesting the link. You talk about how many books you read and stuff. And I used to read a lot, but I don't read a terrible amount recently. But I'm more a fan of give me the sketch, the outline of things. And in terms of the lack of private property, or the collection of all private property into a very small number of hands, that principle goes way, way back. William the Conqueror in 1000 AD paid 40% of his income to a guy named Aaron of Lincolnshire. Now, Aaron of Lincolnshire, I don't believe was a native Englishman. Let's say that. I have to be careful about what I say on this channel. So my scholarship is weak, mind you. I'm grabbing this like real quick off of various social media. But Aaron of Lincolnshire, not only was he getting 40% of William the Conqueror's income, but there were bishops and entire towns that paid interest to Aaron of Lincolnshire. And so there are numerous people in this sort of intellectual dissident sphere that are, it's quite the fashion right now to criticize democracy, right? Democracy sucks because I don't like this and that. But at the end of the day, I view human incentive as the most powerful force probably in history, and that there's no rule set, there is no system of governance that has successfully contained human incentive. That is to say, kings have been betrayed, entire nations have been betrayed, and not really because of an ideological reason, but because of a different incentive. And I don't think there's any rule set that the three of us or any other people could come up with that will overcome someone's willingness to betray a nation, whatever, if the reward is great enough.
Well, not even a nation, just their brother or their group or their ethnicity or whatever, Right. So
well, most people, agreed. Most people are not in a position where they could betray an entire nation. But yeah, will people screw over their own family members to get an inheritance? Yeah, they'll do that. I mean, that when I was a kid growing up, because I'm in my late 50s now, there were always stories of, the Texas oil man dies, and then the whole family gathers for the reading of the will, and then all the backroom deals and the.
I leave each of you $1. The rest I give away to some stranger because you're all worthless.
The UPS man, I'm giving $32 million to the UPS man for being kind to me, for smiling every time he delivered a package, and that sort of thing, But stories about that and jokes about that were pretty common. So yeah, people will they will sacrifice family relationships and all sorts of other relationships for some perceived gain, especially if there's no negative consequence to that.
Absolutely. And when you say you're talking about democracy and to your initial point, E. Michael Jones, I think, has written a lot about that. But I think a lot of the criticisms of democracy focus on parliamentary democracy, and I think participatory democracy among autonomous people is much better. It's a much better form of political system overall, which would be more like rule by caucus, which is having participated in some caucuses, the minority has a much greater strength in such circumstances than in a parliamentary democracy or something like that.
Right. Well, I've developed a theory just to be contrarian to the democracy haters. I started asking, why does democracy cover the earth? And you could argue that democracy is the newest form of human governance. I've said this, I'll repeat it very quickly. The god kings of Mesopotamia, the pharaohs of Egypt, the tribal chieftains of pre-Christian Europe have all fallen to democracy. Democracy covers the earth, and any place that is not a democracy, you probably don't want to be. Like, you don't really want to be in Bhutan or Saudi Arabia. Nobody goes there thinking, thank God I got away from that democracy, So there's a reason why the newest form of human governance has conquered the entire globe, and most people haven't figured that out. They don't have a good understanding of why things succeed and why things fail. Their biases blind them to many, many things. So I love to pose that question to people. Why does democracy cover the earth? Why does it rule the earth if it sucks so bad? And their basic answer is
I see. Yeah, that's an interesting point. And as I said, the idea of participatory democracy is, I think, a very meaningful uh, method of political working or political organizing.
human governance. What are the arguably are the forms of human governance? Theocracy, right? Authoritarianism, left-wing authoritarianism, right-wing authoritarianism, or democracy. And people say, well, direct democracy is unwieldy and impractical. It has to be a representative republic, some sort of parliamentary system, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And, variations on the theme. But my argument, the reason why democracy has slaughtered every other form of government on the planet Earth is because it is better at solving real world problems. That a multi pronged approach, many people, many different viewpoints looking at a problem from different perspectives are more effective problem solvers than shifting the entire burden of problem solving for a state, a nation, or whatever onto one person. You know what I mean? Putting this all on one person's shoulders is a delusional fantasy that the monarchists keep thinking, oh no, if we could just get a good king, or if we could get a king who's not too influenced by his mother, if we could get a king who's not too militaristic or what, like they keep fantasizing. They look through all of human history for this perfect king who's not a fuck up in one way or another, and they can't find them. And instead of thinking, hey, maybe we're looking for the wrong thing, they just, they double down and look twice as hard.
If only the Tsar knew. Otto probably knows that reference.
I do know that one. And the Tsar is far away.
Yeah, God is in his heaven, and the Tsar is far away.
Yeah, well, that's that these people, and I think we know who we're talking about when we mention this. It's a rootless cosmopolitan elite. They have primarily survived using economic means, and they have, I would argue, dominated the world via economic means. It isn't for a lot of dissident people, right-wing people, or people who think that they're right-wing. I would argue there is no right wing, but people who are anti-communist and anti left-wing authoritarianism, those people never understand why the left-wing authoritarians succeed. And the reason why is because the people who control the incentives, what we call money, want the left-wing authoritarians to succeed. It's a historical fact that Lev Bronstein or Leon Trotsky received $20 million from Jacob Schiff when he visited him in New York in whatever, like in 1916. And then guess what? The Tsar had, and his family had not a whole lot of sand left in the hourglass, and that capitalism driven by banking in the United States was the spark that lit world communism. People sort of overlooked that very simplistic and very simple observation. It takes money to take over a country, which they did, and that process hasn't stopped. It wasn't a one-off thing. This has happened again and again and again in various different geographic areas where a rootless cosmopolitan elite perceives their interest to be, they will use whatever tool they need to use, whether it's a left-wing tool or a right-wing tool or whatever, whether they'll use violence or deception or some combination of both to gain legal mastery over everything, like buying all the private property in upstate New York.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that.
Well, as Deng Xiaoping said, it doesn't matter if a cat is black or white, only if it catches mice.
But yeah, Deng was well. How long was he in power? He was in power for a long time, wasn't he?
1976 until he died. So I don't know. I forget the official Deng Xiaoping, former chairman of the Chinese People's Consultative Committee. So he died in 1997.
I
So
made it.
yeah,
He made it right up until Hong Kong came back into the fold.
yeah. Well, it says here officially he was the de jure head of the People's Republic of China from 1978 to 1989, but he could have been like chairman of the Spittoon Society and still been de facto head till 97 when he died. So
Yeah, well, chairman of the Spittoon Society in China is more a prestigious title than we in the West, we round-eyed Westerners might imagine. But seriously, yeah, it's the point is like Dr. Breck was saying, the Maoist the Maoist principles of business or something like that, or whatever he said the book he's going to write is that what you need, things have to work. At the end of the day, they have to work, and this is on an individual level, and as you scale upwards, it becomes more complex, and more things have to work for a nation to succeed, and then for one nation to overcome another. That's a whole, that's a level of complexity that's impossible for anyone to figure out. It looks like pure chance or destiny or something like that. So that things have to work on a basic level. Driving that understanding into people's heads, I think, is a tougher job than it appears, because whether people read a lot or they don't read a lot, critical thinking skills are not taught and are not even talked about. And so that's a skill set that you need, that people need to navigate life. And they're just not going to have, because they don't know it exists.
Well, yeah, at this point, it's not really possible. Like I said, everybody's LARPing. The reason where I got the idea of the Maoist Guide to Entrepreneurship is watching Mexican immigrants function underground in society, running their businesses, and their basically you can start a concrete company. You get your cousin and his cousin and two more cousins together, and you get a couple of shovels, and you order some concrete and build some forms, and you got a concrete company. But this is all underground, and most people don't want to think in doing anything in terms of doing anything constructive. They want to LARP because everybody plays computer games now. And so, in reference to critical thinking that you're talking about, everybody thinks in terms of a computer game, not in terms of comprehending a problem and solving it, or thinking about it like your generation thought about things for the most part.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. It's interesting. Jonathan was saying that New Mexico has a worse Gini coefficient than Oaxaca. I knew a girl, I worked in the taxi business some years ago, named Florentina, who was from Oaxaca, Mexico. And I knew she had come here illegally. And I was curious how this happens. There's all the stuff of what you hear and see on television, but I had access to this person, and I asked her how it all worked. And basically, like the coyotes, the human traffickers come from town to town, and they say, like the bus is going to be leaving at the end of the week or the end of the month or whatever. And what they did was, the price to go from Oaxaca, which is like the southernmost city in Mexico, to the border was only like $600. And the way it worked was, Florentina got on the bus, and when she got to the border, she would call someone in her village or call her family directly and say, all right, I made it to the border, send $600 via Western Union to whatever account that the human trafficker had. So then they would do that, right? So that was $600 to go from Oaxaca to the border, and then to go across the border was another $2,500. And she actually got caught. She got caught twice. I think she got caught twice walking through the desert. But the third time they made it to a large villa, a large home in Arizona. They were all brought into the basement, and in the basement was just one telephone where they all called again back home to say, all right, I've made it to America, send the $2,500 to X, Y, or Z. And that's how it worked, you know. So she had technically a criminal record in entering the US, but she had no problem finding work. And when she worked at the taxi business, she was also working like in a restaurant or something, and she would just go door to door to door, asking if people needed stuff cleaned. She would sweep, she would clean windows, she would do whatever. And this immigrant, you know, spirit or whatever, this need to make money to survive, is really common in Central Americans and South Americans stuff. Not at all common in the video game generation that you're talking about. These upper middle class white kids who may have a better understanding of what's going wrong or something's going wrong, but they live in this perfect digital world where there's no stress and no strain, and they have no internal drive to make something happen. So they're going to sit back and essentially Florentina and her children are going to eat their effing lunch.
Well, I think, you know, the deal is, yes, Florentina and that generation of Hispanic immigrants were very successful, but their kids are going to be more like the white kids, and they're going to get fat and they're going to play video games, and that's going to be the end of that. What we've seen in the factory towns is that the Hispanics came in the 90s and basically took over all the jobs. And the Hispanics progeny got fat and lazy within record time. And what we saw next was they brought in the Somalis to work in the plants. And the Somalis kind of stuck together and had some kind of ethnic and autonomy or whatever. So they were kind of difficult to work with. And you know how they've been in Minnesota and so forth and so on. But then now they've brought in the Marshallese, who are they kind of all have Down syndrome. Not really, but so to speak. I'm being facetious.
You understand, these are not the brightest people on the planet.
Yeah, and the Marshallese are tractable, and they work, and they just go about their business. So the Marshallese are turning into good American factory and plant workers, comparative, but
worker drones. Yeah, that's what everybody wants, the worker drones, and cheaper, ever cheaper ones.
What we saw is that the Hispanics, just kind of the younger Hispanics, are for the most part ending up like white kids today.
Yeah, I agree with that. Florentina married a guy named Pedro, who got here without ever getting arrested, and he worked as a cook in restaurants. He was a pretty good cook. And they ended up getting married. So since she met, and because Pedro's bosses really liked him, they sponsored him for citizenship. And somehow or other, he got to be a citizen. So Florentina eventually married Pedro, and they, Petey, and they had kids. And I lost touch with her when her child was maybe like 4 or 5, but she was amazed at how smart her kid was. And while she was here working in the restaurant, cleaning stuff at the taxi stand or whatever, she had a home built for herself back in Oaxaca, which was like to have an entire house built, not like a big house. I don't know what the square footage was, but it was like maybe $2,500 or $3,000. She could have her own house separate from her parents. And she told her daughter, "Oh, we're going to go back to visit grandma and grandpa, and I'll show you the house I had built." And the kid, who was like already in school in America, said, "I don't want to go to Mexico and eat beans," you know. So that's a personal anecdote that absolutely reflects what you just said. The next generation becomes Americanized or softened or whatever you want to say, like immediately. Like the immersion in this culture destroys any whatever drive or virtue, however you want to see it, that outsiders have. I mean, the goal is one infinitely malleable blob that you can endlessly milk for resources that go from the bottom to the top.
Yeah, I will say for Hispanics, they briefly had a greater sense of autonomy in that they want to own property in the United States, and if you go to a Hispanic grocery store, I'm not Hispanic, but I kind of look Hispanic, so I go and roll with it, and because Hispanics are less gay than white people, and while it's kind of hard to interact with them for a long period of time if you have if you're not in a double digit IQ. But I'm just going with the Mexican grocery. It's so much better stocked than a Walmart or a grocery in a white neighborhood, because the Mexicans kind of know what they want. They know what they want. They want land because they couldn't get any land in Mexico for a long time. Now they can to some extent if they make some American dollars. And they want good food. They don't want to eat beans. You're right, but you can get way better meat in a Mexican grocery store because they appreciate meat much more than Americans do, and you get fresher produce in a Mexican grocery store
They
as well.
also love the camarones.
Yeah.
I've never seen. Being in a landlocked state, I would not have expected to have been so much shrimp being sold. But
Well,
I
yeah,
swear, everybody from that grew up in Chihuahua, they want camarones.
they love seafood. I guess it's because they have such a long coast. Maybe, I don't know. But
I think they picked that up from like people like the
French
people who worked at resorts in Acapulco and Cabo San Lucas and stuff. Acapulco was a thing like in the 70s. You know what I mean? So
yes.
and Americans being able to throw money around down there was surely drove stories. I remember when I was a kid, there was these two guys. Who was it? Eddie Lucas. I'm trying to think of the guy's name. Eddie Lucas and Chuck Garter. Two people who, of course, you never heard of. But they had seen the movie. What was the movie with Jack Nicholson and Dennis Hopper when they're on the motorcycles? Peter Fonda.
Yes, Easy Rider.
Easy Rider, right? So they
the
saw
last
Easy
part
Rider.
of that is filmed in New Mexico in the north,
right.
in Taos.
Okay. Well, that movie was. This is how old I am. I was a little kid, but these two guys were like older, like 17, 18-year-old guys. And they decided that they were going to fly to Mexico, to Acapulco, which was the hot place to go back in the day. And they would buy a pound, like an entire pound of marijuana. And then they would bring it back to New York and then they would sell it. It was either Easy Rider or Midnight Express, whatever. One of those movies got in their heads, right?
Well, Midnight Express is where he gets arrested in Turkey for smuggling.
Yes, I know. But it's the whole smuggle drugs back to make a fortune. They probably didn't see Midnight Express because that did not have a happy outcome. But then again, neither did Easy Rider. But we're going off on a tangent. The point is, Richie Lucas and Chuck Garter flew down to Acapulco to buy some weed, and they stayed at whatever resort, and they're hanging around the pool. And on the very first day, they just walk up, just walking around to people, and they said to somebody like, "Hey, where can we buy some weed?" The guy's like, hold on, goes and gets somebody else. Guy comes over and says, how much weed do you want to buy? And they said, we want to buy a pound. And he's like, okay, I'll sell you a pound.
Well, it's Mexico. Wouldn't you do it in kilos? You'd say half a kilo.
Listen, these are double-digit white guys, from the 70s, all right? And this is a story that's older than Dr. Breck, by the way. So... You know what I mean? I'm remembering stuff from when I'm 9.
Yeah, you're remembering stuff that's older than me. I was born in 1970.
At any rate, the point is, they go to their room. 20 minutes later, the guy knocks on the door. He's got a pound of weed, right? And they buy it, and this is going to be great. They're all excited. The guy leaves. They start testing it. Of course, they're gonna sample a little bit, and then like 10 minutes later, there's a knock on the door. And they just open the door, and there's the same guy and two other dudes with badges that say "Federales, you're under arrest." And they take them to jail in Mexico. They dunk their heads in water a little bit, a little waterboarding pre 9/11. And they tell them, listen, have your parents wire us $1,500 each for both of you, or you're never getting out of Mexico. And which they promptly did. Western Union the money down there, and they said, get on a fucking airplane and don't ever come back to Acapulco. So, you know, that Mexican official police corruption is like beyond. You know, they do. I've heard so many stories of people who went to Mexico that if you had a white face in the car, you would get stopped every 10 miles, and the police would wait for a bribe. They'd wait for a $5 or $10 bribe. You know what I mean? You could not move with white people from point A to point B in Mexico because the police are like, you go nowhere, halt, don't move, and until you come up with some cash, you're not going anywhere. So that Mexico is so insanely poor and corrupt that the incentive is ignore the rule set, just grab the thing of value right now. And it's always been that way. It's easy to understand why, you know, the first generation that comes here is super hungry, and as soon as they collect a little bit of something, their kids grow fat and lazy, as fat and lazy as white.
Well, it's happened to every generation of immigrants that ever came to North America. I posit that there's something in the overall geography of the land, be it magnetism or something about North America that turns everybody wrong, turns everybody gay.
Well, there's an enormous there's a lot of gayness out there. That is true. And I'm not a big fan of that generally. But there's, you know, I have a YouTube channel, and some of whom are people in the chat right now, like members of subscribers. And I've come to the conclusion they're basically all homosexual white communists who don't like blacks or Jews.
Yeah, that's pretty much a lot of these young people starting up. The stream is gay. Yeah, whatever. This is the most heterosexual stream you've ever been on. I'm replying to that.
It's one of those things that when I first went across, I'm sorry, say it again, John.
The guy who said the stream is gay is Donald Robertson. He doesn't have a fond view of James.
By the way, yeah, he's a hater. He used to be a hate watcher on whatever my previous channel that got erased for hate speech. The whole no homo thing is the most gay thing ever. Like there's on my channel, I showed a clip of, it was like a 9-minute clip of these Korean War veterans. You know what I mean? And these were guys that were like fighting Chinese dudes in trenches by like human wave attacks, bayoneting dudes. It was like insane, blood-soaked, freezing mud nightmare. And these guys are saying, we love these dudes. We love it. Like it's old white guys using the word love in a way that you never, it doesn't happen. The 50s, this didn't happen. Men don't speak these way. These guys who survived nightmare conditions and then came home and tried to rebuild their lives, they just speak their minds, and they use language that they're unashamed of. And there's another clip I had of a guy who's special forces, recent special forces guy who's deployed to he's deployed to Somalia and Colombia and all sorts of different conflict areas. And he says, you know, I wasn't sent as a hero, I was sent as a bully, and I didn't meet evil characters. He said, I just met people. He says, and they're real people with husbands and wives and fathers and mothers and sons and children, and people who love them the way they love you. And these two clips in my mind, the people who have been up against it the hardest, like in the most brutal life and death sense, they don't worry about, oh, do I sound like a homo? Do I not? Like, if you have to say no homo, you're a fucking homo. You know what I mean? Like, if you really have to clarify that, like if there's any fucking doubt, just get the fuck out of here, you stupid bag. I don't want to mess up your channel, Jonathan.
I would
Get
agree.
lost. You know what I mean?
I would agree with you. One of the earliest adult books I read was Colonel David Hackworth's memoirs, in which he talks about being a raider in Korea, and very fascinating book. If you've read it, if you haven't, I recommend it. But yeah, it was totally different. You might almost say memoirs of a heterosexual man. In comparison to a lot of today's world. I feel like a lot of men were raised by their mothers, even if their parents were in a married relationship. Their fathers were absent from doing their roles as fathers in the last 20, 30 years. They abdicated their roles as fathers, and so their mothers raised them. And I see this a lot with the young men who are raised by single mothers too. They have a very feminine outlook on the world, and they obscure it with bodybuilding and so forth and so on. But it's a very gay way, I agree with you, of looking at the world.
Well, one thing I heard you say you want some Russian medication to like sharpen your memory or something. I don't. The only medication I just started taking it recently, something called Clomid, which is actually a female fertility drug. Really? But in men, it shuts off the estrogen receptor in your head and it makes you pump testosterone. And since I'm 57 and I want to feel like I'm 27, I was like, hey, let me give this stuff a shot. And it has, I don't know what you're on, but like I've said, there's no negative side effects. I don't feel sore and aching in the morning. And that's a huge plus for me. Am I a little bit stronger? Maybe. Like, you know what I mean? But mostly I don't feel like shit when I get out of bed in the morning. And
well, you don't look like you're in your 50s.
57.
You don't look to be in your 50s at all.
We're all in our 50s here.
That's luck. That's pure luck and genetics. It has nothing to do with very little to do with my health habits. My point is, reasonable people will look at a situation and think, well, how can I optimize this? But when you have part of like, you talk about the feminization of men and men with a female outlook and men who are raised by their mothers, it's such a lopsided worldview that when they decide, well, I want to do something traditionally masculine. I want to be strong. I want to be athletic. I wanted to have some sense of physical power in my body or whatever. I want to be healthy. They go for something like they think they want to be Arnold Schwarzenegger in 1975. You know what I mean? So they'll take steroids. They'll do all kinds of crazy stuff, and they go overboard in the opposite direction because there's no sort of older, wiser male figure to go, listen, slow down, develop yourself, develop your speed, your strength, whatever, naturally. Like don't look in the next 6 weeks to become the super jacked UFC champion you just watched on television last night. Like that's not realistic. Here's how you choose to be responsible for your own health, your own this and that. Like they don't have that. They just have that woman's I want it now. You know what I mean? Lobster and champagne or no nookie, and that's their worldview.
Yeah, no self-restraint or discipline. And I feel like their fathers, and since the 80s or 90s or whatever, certainly I call the millennials generation faggot, and I call Zoomers generation maggot, because they're kind of like just what's left off the corpse. They're feeding off what's left of the corpse of civilization. And but their fathers, they don't have any mentors or older people whom they can turn to. I was very fortunate in that I had a lot of good mentors, not a lot, but several good mentors who were able to steer me and help me and advise me, and I was willing to listen to their advice. And and a lot of these people were born in the early 1900s, and I was able to take advantage of their wisdom at a very early age. But most people didn't have that, and I think even if there were mentors available, most of the young people today would not use them.
That's true. At the end of the
That is
day,
definitely true. That was my experience teaching middle school. That total lack of discipline, and largely because very bad parenting.
Or no parenting at all, basically.
Not as I recognized it. No.
yeah, or I would either. I mean, I listen to, IRL. I interact with some younger people, and I'm like, I look at them and go, how are you from the same country, the same culture that I'm from? They aren't. I mean, there has been enormous loss of sort of adult, the basic adult wisdom and habits, discipline, etc., and an outlook in the world. That's largely been lost, and I don't think it's coming back anytime soon. And that's the people who decide what is dominant in the culture are, again, I would say, a rootless cosmopolitan elite that have historically had a negative effect on every culture that they have come to dominate. And they do this not because people are just willy-nilly willing to abandon their culture, their traditions, et cetera, et cetera. They do it by incentivizing the elites of the culture to go in the direction of the cosmopolitans, and that draws everyone. People see, like, well, that guy's my hero. That's who I wish I was or wish I could be. If he's doing X, I'll do X. Like, for me, one of the things you talk about the boomers as the whatever, what do you call them, the corpse generation, the what?
No, I was talking about millennials and Zoomers, and that would
Oh,
be
me too.
Generation Maggot. No, Generation Faggot is the millennials, and Generation Maggot is the Zoomers, who are feeding off the corpse of what's left of civilization.
Okay, yeah. All right. When it was, because when I was a teenager in the '80s, listen, we understood that being a rock star was fucking awesome. You flew around in your own jet. You lived in a fucking mansion. You only worked 2 days a week, Friday night and Saturday night. You had all the drugs you wanted, the hottest girls all the time. We got why this was great to be a rock star. And I interacted when I was a kid, because I had a mentally ill parent. I used to smoke marijuana when I was 12. I would meet hippies, and they'd be like there was crap dirt weed. It was nothing. It's like 1/1000th as strong as what's available today. But they'd be like standing in a circle, and be like, dude, I want to share this with you, man. Dude, I want to share this. You know what I mean? And me and my friends were like, and my friends loved me because I would go and talk to them, and I would slowly crush out the joint in my hand, and I would walk away, and they'd be too stoned to notice. And I would get like half a joint free. You know what I mean? I would get free weed from these guys, but they didn't get that, like, hey, drugs cost money, and it's fun, and it's it's fun and it's pleasurable, but this is not what life is really based on. If you could be a rock star, be a rock star, but they're not. None of us kids in the '80s thought that like fucking Ozzy Osbourne was a good guy. You know what I mean? Maybe some people thought he was really a devil worshiper or not, but they just thought, fuck, I want to live his life. You know what I mean? And this was long before the television show. But anyone like that, we understood it's good to be that thing, but we are not that thing. And today, the millennials and the Zoomers especially, the idea between, a cultural elite and you is nothing. It's like, oh, I just need a viral video. I just need whatever, and they don't understand that no fame is organic, and that what the elites can get away with, because they generate enormous sums of money, they generate enormous value for others. They can get the drug rehab, they can get whatever they need. You can't live life that way because you don't have the resources for when you fuck up. You know what I mean? But culturally, they don't see that. They just think, oh, I want to be that, whatever the fuck that thing is, and it's wildly unrealistic. And they're guaranteed to all end up depressed and suicidal.
But they've all managed to become fat and have weird colored hair and piercings and Yakuza style tattoos on their. Well, even worse than Yakuza. Here, the big thing is the tattoos on the face and neck, and hands, which I don't understand.
It's designed. They do that specifically to limit the jobs they can get, and they do that specifically. There's a phenomenon known as aposematism, not anti-Semitism, aposematism, which is a darkening of the skin tones or the colorations of an animal. And there's some indications that indicates a more aggressive, more dangerous animal. The most obvious case of deceptive aposematism is the monarch butterfly, right? Birds eat butterflies. People don't know this, but birds eat butterflies, right? Except the monarch butterfly, which is orange and black, is really bitter to birds and makes them sick. So birds learn to avoid that. Well, there's a moth that's smaller than the monarch butterfly, but its colors are exactly the same as.
Right, camouflage. Don't eat me. Right. Don't eat me.
So, and it's a type of deceptive aposematism. You know what I mean? So oftentimes, and Dr. Breck probably testify to this. Light-skinned black dudes are not perceived as hostile, as dangerous as dark-skinned black dudes. You know what I mean? That's period, end of story. You know what I mean? And that's not just true for white people. That's true for everybody. So this is whether there's a genuine biological basis to the behavior or not. This is how it's perceived, and this is how people behave.
Well, I'm not actually of African descent either, but I have seen that in whatever, the lighter the skin in any race, the better they're liked.
Yeah, that's generally true. I'm sorry, I just assumed you were, but whatever, no big deal.
I pass for a lot of things.
Are you Guyanese or something like that? Are you Guyanese or some
weirdo?
No.
I'm actually a mix of American Indian and white.
Okay.
But I can grow a beard. Most American Indians can't grow facial hair.
That's true.
Oh, I didn't know.
Yeah.
That's such a bizarre genetic.
I'm just under 50% white, but I just turned out very dark. But with the ability to grow facial hair.
Listen. The thing about genetics, and I remember, again, this is like a kind of turning into boomer moments, but when I was a boy, my father had a heart attack, right? Because he had heart attacks. He smoked cigarettes, and he had like his chest cracked open. It did open heart surgery where they opened up the
rib cage,
your rib cage, and then they would wire it back together. Like I had a heart attack too when they just shot a thing through my wrist and then fixed it. You know what I mean? The technology advanced quite a bit from 1970 to 2000.
Well, it depends how bad it is. My father, when he had a heart attack, they had to cut him open, and it took forever for the bones and the rib cage to heal.
Okay, but the thing about genetics, and when I remember after that happened, there was the Human Genome Project, and there was all these newspaper articles. This is back when I used to read the newspapers and believe everything I read in the newspapers. Because I was a kid, dad's sick, the future's uncertain, everyone's nervous. And I read this article like Congress is going to fund the Human Genome Project, a scientific effort to understand the new science of DNA and blah, 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 blah. And with it, who knows, we might unlock the secrets to curing cancer and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, and I remember as a kid, this was quite a comfort. You know what I mean? I guess I was looking for some sort of self-comfort, and I found it in this external news article. You know what I mean? Did it work out that way? No. Did we learn a bunch of stuff? Yes. Is genetic science, as we understand it today, 100% legitimate? I don't trust it because I think it got corrupted because of incentives, like everything else got corrupted. And So when somebody says the genetic basis of this and the genetic basis of that, and I think like, well, fuck shit. My mother was 5'3", you know what I mean? My father was 5'8". My sister, who's the shortest in the family, is 5'7". Both my mother and my father had brown hair, brown eyes. My sister has blonde hair and green eyes. I have brown hair and brown eyes like both my parents. My brother, who was slightly shorter than me, had brown hair and blue eyes. All of us were taller than my parents, and all of us are significantly more physically attractive than my parents. So you thinking, oh, I know what the genes are going to come out like. I know what's going to happen. You have no fucking clue. Like, you don't fucking know. And people who claim, and this is widely claimed on the homosexual alt-right, like, oh, DNA, blah, 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 this and that. Shut the fuck up, you stupid. Shut up. You don't know what you're talking about. Like, I don't want to blow up your channel, John. I'm trying to because now I'm drinking the hard stuff, by the way. I was just drinking like grape juice before, but now I'm going for the hard stuff. So I got to really watch my language. But
you moved on from the Retsina to Ouzo?
Yeah, I haven't drank Ouzo since before I went to Greece. I don't know why, whatever. And the 2023, I uncorked the demon once again. But the point being, there are these people who, they want to claim that they're intellectuals, they're the alt-right, they're the dissidents, whatever, and that they have some sort of insight into how DNA interacts. You have no clue, man. This is way more complicated than anything any individual can understand. This is got to be like real science done over decades to give a hint.
Well, I do believe that some of the elite families with very elderly bloodlines, very venerable bloodlines, have gotten a lot of things worked out in terms of manipulating genetics, but they don't share that with the general public for the most part. And we've lost a lot of, what's basically basic animal husbandry, what they used to call animal husbandry, is the breeding animals to produce the best stock. We've lost most of the knowledge of doing that. We have only the most rudimentary understanding of that, and in this period of time, we can.
That was my other alternative career. If academia didn't work out, I was going to become a stud, but ended up as a janitor.
Okay, you're talking about I remember when I was. This is how once again how old I am. When I was in school, they taught us about Gregor Mendel, who was who lived in like
German monk
1066.
with the pea pods.
Yeah, with the pea pod. So he was like the first to do hybrid species and stuff, and mix a rose with a tulip and a pea with like a plum with a peach and whatever. Like he was the very beginning of this, and I still remembered is and I don't even need drugs from Russia to do that. I just need some Ouzo. But anyway, Gregor Mendel was a monk in like medieval England or something, or France.
No, somewhere in I think what is now Austria.
Oh, is it a German guy? Okay, so a German guy.
Yeah.
So, but whatever. The point is, this using observation, right? Just observing and trying things. He took the first steps in the modern era, in the post-Christian era, towards what we now understand as genetic science. And I think that I'm a big fan of more information is better than less, and I want more high quality information than crap information. And so when you think about you talk about the elite families know more about genetics than perhaps the wider scientific community, maybe. I mean, David Rockefeller died right after Trump was elected, right? And there was a meme how Trump's son Barron. This was like an alt-right, like a gay alt-right meme. Like he was because he had magic powers to make evil people die or something like that. Well, David Rockefeller had received 8 heart transplants. There's no way statistically you could find 8 hearts on the planet Earth that fit your genetics. That's just not possible. There is an enormous fucking tilting of the scales to make everything even remotely acceptable to David Rockefeller's DNA, and they were going to stick it in his fucking chest, and they would make those fucking stitches go out to his fucking armpits if they needed to. You know what I mean? Like they would keep stitching further and further. Like we're going to make this work. And the reason why, now arguably it pushed medical science and it pushed our understanding of genetics and transplant technology and rejection issues. That's all true, but it was driven by Rockefeller money. It was driven by incentive. And advancements in civilization come from an incentive to think differently, act differently, and get a different result. You know, and the people who control the incentives control the world.
Yeah, there's a lot to that. Going back to what you were saying, I think the whole deal with the younger generation, not to get off what your current topic is, that I think most people born since the 21st century began were born to die out, basically, or go extinct. And so consequently, all the things that they do to themselves, be it tattoos or rings or self-harm or what have you, are just part of what the trauma they're undergoing as they're being prevented from reproducing or obtaining or accomplishing anything in life or obtaining any resources. They're being deprived of basically everything in life. So that's not a defense of them, but that's I think the reason why people acting as younger people are acting as they do.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with you there. That human beings are used to extract, humanity is used to extract resources, whatever that is, whether that's US dollars or it's oil out of the ground or it's cobalt or whatever, upwards, right? The benefit goes upwards to a tiny elite, that it is really naked right now, that it's really like super obvious. You know, when I hate to sound like a boomer here, but I guess I'll be the honorary boomer for this stream. But when I was a kid, you know, democratic politics was about unions and the working man and the standard of living and blah, 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 and health benefits and vacation, et cetera, et cetera. And now people are like, you know, there's no way to escape the reality is you're going to be a door dasher. You know what I mean? All the tech layoffs that are currently the tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands that Wall Street is doing right now is taking people who used to have 6-figure incomes and making them door dashers. You know what I mean? That's they're no longer valuable because the economy's changed because of inflation and a bunch of other things. So they're no longer valuable as software engineers. So you know what? You can deliver my shrimp. You know what I mean? Whether the Mexican guy wants to do it or he doesn't want to do it, you know what I mean? You can deliver my shrimp, whatever, paella, and again, it's about maximizing the resource extraction as quickly as you can. And when those people are dead and empty husks, toss them aside and you know, bring in new ones, whether they're Somalis or Marshall Islanders or whatever. And I think that Caucasians are a little bit more, I don't know, aware of their predicament, aware of the, I don't know, the drama.
Downward social mobility.
Well, I think they have an unconscious. They're unconscious. The collective unconscious is more active in their minds. I don't think they consciously know what's happening for the most part. But you know, what we're seeing is population reduction on a massive scale, where in America functions as the meat grinder that they put everybody in to eliminate them, basically. Because you see this happen with with immigrants, Mexicans or whatever. They come in, they may have 3 children. Their children may have 1 child, and then the next child will have no child, and then the line will go extinct. And I think that's the whole purpose, is to population reduction on a massive
Well,
scale.
here's where I'm going to disagree with you, because I don't think I deliver private parts of airplane parts for private jets, and on occasion I see the people who fly on private jets. I don't really interact with them a great deal. Obviously, I'm the guy carrying the box to the front desk or to the AV mechanics or whatever. But I am in the same building in a very close proximity to these people more often than most Americans. They are, from what I can gather, they're really not a whole lot smarter than you or I, certainly, but they have much closer access to material resources, and their expertise is at maximizing those access to those resources for themselves. Okay. And what that looks like to them is just them maintaining their position in the world, and their families of blankety blank family from whatever. Like, I drove to Dulles, Virginia. The Dulles family was rich in the fucking during the Revolutionary period. You know what I mean? They have a city named after themselves. So even these rootless cosmopolitans.
Wait, there's a city named after me too, but it's not very big.
But apparently you're not making any money from it.
No, but there is a tiny town of Pole in Germany. Let me see if I can get the link here.
Well, while you're doing that, I might reply to that. I do know I actually have billionaire clients. And I think the number of billionaires, of public billionaires, is fake. I think there are more billionaires who don't want to be known. They want to be anonymous. And a lot of the public billionaires who you see are actually, they're like Epstein. Remember, Epstein was a billionaire, and then he was a multimillionaire. Then I don't know if Epstein has any money at all before all was said and done. They were saying, oh, he was lying about being a billionaire, and we all went along with it. But I think a lot of billionaires are like that. But to your point, I think there's a lot of warfare going on amongst the wealthy right now over those resources, and they view everybody else as cannon fodder, basically.
All right. The city of Pole was founded in 1247. It has a total population of 325 people.
It's more
nice.
more like a village.
Yes, it is located. It is located in Western Germany.
Like one block. That's literally. That's less.
It's 776 years old.
Less people that live in the apartment complex I currently pay rent in. Oy vey.
It is small but old.
Yeah. Okay.
The mayor is named Holger Guth. Maybe we should write him.
Oh. With a name like Holger Guth, how could you go wrong? There's nothing.
Hey,
if you can't trust Holger Guth, who can you trust?
The city of Pole has survived 776 years, including 2 world wars.
So give them credit for being tough. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Good for them. Good for the city of Pole. My point is, the city of Dulles, Virginia, is named after the Dulles family, which was one of the 400 richest families in the Revolutionary period, and is still today one. And even rootless cosmopolitans of fantastic wealth, and I would argue that Zuckerberg and Jeff Bezos are amongst them, do not have cities named after them yet. To your point, to sort of keep the conversation connected to your original point, that private ownership is being amongst American citizens is being shrunk into an ever smaller circle of owners. That circle of owners, I doubt they're private individuals in a lot of cases. They'll be trusts or corporations. And so there'll be a kind of a 21st century digital feudalism, I think, is the most likely future for a lot of America.
I don't disagree with you, but I do believe that Bezos and Zuckerberg are just front men, and they're not really the really the real billionaires. They may be influential, but they're just frontmen. They're not. They're basically like Epstein. They can be eliminated or put to the side if necessary.
Well, okay. I would argue this great wealth, whether you're talking about billionaire, like you could maybe make $1 million or a couple of $1 million if you're a really good entrepreneur, if you're a good Maoist or whatever, if you have the right thing at the right time and there's enough sort of loose cash in the economy that you can make money off of. Like there was a dude,
basically like winning the lottery.
Right. You know, but it is kind of like winning the lottery, but you're working a bit harder. But people like even like Donald Trump, like you don't get to be billionaire level without compromising a lot of things, without owing allegiance to people much more powerful than yourself. And I would argue, and I have argued, that there are since the U.S. dollar is the global reserve currency, it's helpful to study this a little bit. And what we understand about the US dollar is that it is a promissory note issued by a private bank called the Federal Reserve Bank of America. It's really not federal and it doesn't have any reserves. And that it is composed of, the Rockefellers are involved, JP Morgan is involved, but those are 2 of 6, and the other 4 banking interests were the Warburgs, the Rothschilds, and I can't remember the other 2. Their names elude me, but there is I don't remember. I like literally, it's gone completely out of my head at this point. But
I don't.
4 out of 6 are, I would say, not Americans. You could argue the Rockefellers are German because they're ethnically German, and JP Morgan was English, but you know, it's been 100+ years since the Federal Reserve effectively compromised the Constitution by in the Constitution, it is Congress, the legislature, which is responsible for the money and coinage of the issuance of money and coinage in the United States. They outsourced, or they transferred that responsibility to the Federal Reserve Bank of America in 1913. And nothing has been the same since. Once again, let's use a Jen Psaki term. Let's circle back to what Dr. Breck was saying earlier, like a caucus style of governance, a populist. Let's ask the entire group what it is they want to do. Like a what?
They call these, they have different names of these types of assemblies. Jorgu is one. Shura is another.
What is
Kulakai is another.
What is it? Do you get like all Kyrgyzstani on me? What are you doing?
No, in Afghanistan, when they have all the people get together to make a decision, it's called a Jorgu.
Oh no, what is it called? Sitting in what do they call it? No, they call it something else.
It's Jorgu, I think.
Jorgu? Shorma or something like city. Shura.
Shuru is also another. Shura.
Shura.
Shura is also council.
How did we get to Afghanistan?
These are popular movements.
Listen, Jonathan. Which one of us is drinking, for Christ's sake? How did we get to Afghanistan? How did we just? we were
popular participatory democracy in Afghanistan.
Yeah, we do. We're going to impose democracy.
The Loya Jorga. Niaz knows what it is. The Loya Jorga is the big tribal assembly in Afghanistan.
Right. I think the act of tribal elders coming together is called sitting in shura. As something like shura or shuga.
Shura is the Persian word, for a council.
Okay, so I remember watching the movie called Restrepo. Did you watch that film called Restrepo? Which was about, it was in Afghanistan. It was a documentary about some U.S. soldiers in Afghanistan. But at any rate, the point of the a private corporation, a group of private banks, 6 private banks, taking over the responsibility for the money and coinage of the United States was effectively the death blow of the US Constitution. Because at that point, a private corporation controls the incentives. Who gets rich? God tier wealth, billionaire, Epstein, Trump, Bezos, Zuckerberg, whatever, fill in the blanks, and who becomes starving and homeless. And that power is literally godlike power. It is the power of a life and death. And knowing this, people respond without even a direct threat, just knowing that if you go against that interest, you and all of your progeny, all of your posterity will suffer. Inclines people, incentivizes people to go along with whatever it is that those who control the incentives want. This is a reality that cuts across. Like I said, it goes from Aaron and Lincolnshire and William the Conqueror to the control of democracies, right? Democracies are exceptionally good at solving problems, whereas monarchies or single point of failure systems are really bad at solving problems, despite the propaganda, what the propagandists tell you. That democracies are excellent at solving problems is the reason why democracy covers the earth. That they generate the most value is what makes them attractive as to these rootless cosmopolitans as a method of extracting value from the many to the few.
Well, I feel like we've circled back to your original point, which is a good point. And as I said, I believe that, and this was quite common, I think, in the history of, as you have said or alluded to, that whatever system of government emerged throughout the course of history was the rootless cosmopolitans were able to take control of it by various means, and it was actually easier in a lot of ways. For example, you have the example of Romania, which was ruled by a king who was under the sway of his Jewish mistress, and she basically coerced him into having suppressing the Iron Guard back in the 1930s, who were actually loyal to their king, but his Jewish mistress persuaded him to have the Codreanu killed, basically executed over that. So that's an example of Jews taking over different forms of government other than democracy. But like I said, moving on from this whole situation, I don't see any possibility of moving on. I think most people are just going to die in place in the next couple of decades. What I see, for example, is that, and I see this all the time, is I see a family that has multiple children, none of whom will procreate or inhabit any new spaces. In other words, so they'll all come home and live with their parents, and they'll take care of their parents when their parents get old, and then they'll get old and die, and then that property, that space that they inhabit and that their parents inhabited, will not have any heirs to it, and it will be taken over by lawyers or trusts or what have you and administered, and so that will lead to the consolidation of resources over a period of time. And I don't see that ending. I don't see any opposition emerging to stop any of these situations, and I don't see any force existing to prevent any of this happening. So I think it's inevitable for the most part.
Okay.
Nice
Hold that thought. Listen, I need a break for like 5 minutes. I'll be right back.
Okay. Well, go ahead. Sorry.
No. I mean, that's pretty blackpilling. So you are you are of the opinion we're just going to continue to get worse. That there's not going to be any point where there's an organized resistance that's capable of making significant change in a positive direction.
I just don't see it. Now, one of your commenters a while back was saying, "Oh, I'm advocate," or he was saying about me that I'm advocating people accept a lower standard of living. And I'm not saying that you should accept a lower standard of anything. I'm saying you just have to get used to it, because you have to basically accustom yourself to it, because in order to get anything better, you've got to go lower, to get higher, is what I'm saying. In other words, you're going to have to cut corners and cut expenses and tighten your belt in order to accomplish something down the road. That's just the way it is. It's not about accepting a lower standard of living. It's being thrust upon you. You may have to temporarily deal with it in order to get somewhere. That's my point. It's not about I'm not telling people to be minimalists. I think minimalism is a stupid trend and very self-defeating, but sometimes you just have to live in an abandoned crack house like I do and figure stuff out,
I hope you get rid of all the crackheads.
Yeah, I got rid of the crackheads, and the it's very interesting where I live. I have this very old farmhouse, and all the farmland around me is owned by two families. Thousands and thousands of acres of farmland, and they grow corn and soybeans, and they have cows too on these lands. But it's just two families, and the lands are in trust, of course. And one family is actually the inheritor, or the heir of one family is actually a rootless cosmopolitan ambulance chasing lawyer, and he put all his money from what do you call, you see those billboards in big cities of those lawyers you call when you have a wreck. But
yeah,
anyway,
the ambulance chasers.
ambulance chasing basically. But he put all his money into farmland, and now he owns tens of thousands of acres. And so yes, I have like an acre of land and a little house surrounded by thousands of acres of land that was owned at one time by dozens of people, or even hundreds of people. They each had their quarter section, their 40 acres or their 80 acres or their 160 acres. And all those 160 or 40 acres or 80-acre tracts were consolidated into these giant farms. And so I see that continuing, because I don't see any human material capable of resisting the current trends at all. I don't see that they're going to exist at any time in the future, and they certainly don't exist now.
Well, okay. So I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jonathan.
No, I can't see the future.
Well, I just don't see the children born in the future being any better than the children who've been born over the last few decades.
That's
here's how I would agree with Dr. Breck, and it may come a little bit from an odd angle, but you're either growing or you're atrophy, right? That's true. If you exercise your body, your muscles are growing, your cardiovascular system's improving, blah 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 blah, or you're sitting and doing nothing, and the thing that powers your life, your muscles, are atrophying because they're not being used. Oxygen, nutrients are not being pumped deep into the muscle tissue, so that's that, right? You're getting stronger or you're getting weaker. Now you say that's a gross oversimplification, but a culture is growing, be it families, individual families together are growing in some way or another, or they are shrinking, right? And so this understanding that that each generation of America is growing less and less, and in fact, we may have passed the point where we are now falling backwards into negative growth, or we're atrophying, and so the the gap is being filled with immigrants. At first Central Americans, now Africans or whatever. In order to, as the base culture, as the foundational culture of this nation is reduced and reduced and reduced to the point where it's not only is it no longer not growing, but it's actively shrinking. It has to be replaced by something else, because again, it's all about resource extraction upward, right? Upward to a rootless cosmopolitan elite. So, you know, whatever has to happen to make that happen, they will do. And despite any cultural or legal or constitutional norms that'll just all go out the window, right? So, and this is relatively easy to do, because anyone that notices is easy to, it's very easy to smear them, because there are two forces there between two fires. The Constitution will be burned, right? Between the fire of anti-Semitism and the fire of racism, right? These are the two sins that cannot be washed away. Like, no matter how much you forgive yourself, no matter how much you beg for forgiveness or prostrate yourself, these sins cannot be washed away. And so what needs to be done for this shrinking, ever weakening populace, which is the Caucasian majority of America, which is 67-ish% right now, right? Not having sufficient children, not growing economically, not even maintaining, as Dr. Breck says, the lands that they had, that the physical geographic area that they control is shrinking. That this is that, and they're being replaced by whatever Marshall Islanders or whomever from wherever, you know, for whom more resources can be extracted more quickly, and the politics of this is going to be explicitly more and more explicitly racial, I say, as things go forward, and people who are light-skinned like myself will be considered moral reprobates and worthy of not just scorn, but physical violence, et cetera, to go further and further. And people who are darker skinned, perhaps like Dr. Breck himself, will be somewhat immune from this, but doesn't mean they won't see that it's going on, right? And so as the demographic change occurs, it isn't, I say, particularly because this rootless cosmopolitan elite hates us, although they do hate us. And I have a particular ethnic viewpoint on this that goes back millennia, but I'm not going to go into that right now. It isn't, most people do not behave, not even the wealthy, not even billionaires, behave in a long time frame sense. They don't have, there more people are high time preference than you think. Being low time preference, being patient or low time preference is a learned habit that is enforced upon you. And for the elites, for whom there are basically no rules, right? Epstein can have a jet called a Lolita Express. He can build a temple on a Caribbean island where who knows how many people were flown from what area to what fucking area to do what activity. Like, we'll never know, right? And none of our investigative agencies.
No, because they removed the attorney general from the was it the Virgin Islands that wanted to investigate it. She had less than 24 hours after announcing she was going to investigate it before they removed her.
Right. So that's real power, right? The ability to make you unemployed, homeless, and starving is real power. And that power, this is where I differ from the religious people. Religious people say, well, it's a spiritual battle and God and Satan and this and that and good and evil and the light and the dark. I dismiss all of that. I am not a believer. I have not been a believer since I was a child. And so let me make that clear. Okay. This is an earthly battle for real earthly resources, and the people respond to earthly incentives. If I tell you I can make you fabulously rich and powerful, right? I can give you mansions, Ferraris, supermodels, mountains of cocaine, whatever you want. What do you want? All of it's yours right here, right now. Just do X, right? The Faustian bargain, the deal with the devil. Now, most people fantasize about that. They'd be like, yes, I would sign as fast as I can. But the point is that those type of bargains, those type of deals with the devil really happen for certain people, not for most of humanity. But it does happen for certain people. And those who defy those powers suffer enormously. Okay, like the attorney who from the U.S. Virgin Islands who said, "Hold on now, we have this rule book here that says we have to investigate," and then boom, all of a sudden, bank account frozen, nobody wants to talk to you, country club fucking membership canceled. Like, what the fuck happened? You know, so it can be not so subtle when the power actually moves, but it's passionless. Like, you will not look at this. They don't need to shoot you. Like in this, again, a boomer moment, and I'm not a boomer, I'm really a Gen X guy, but boomer moment, you know, in the movies, it's always some guy who's going to karate chop you or shoot you in the head with a silenced pistol, and he has leather gloves on, and like, that's all fucking Hollywood bullshit, right? You know what I mean? The reality is they make you fucking poor and unattractive, and that is a much more powerful example to anyone else who would dare pick their fucking head up than anyone can than shooting 100 fucking people.
Well, it's happening kind of as an example with Andrew Tate right now. I'm not standing up for Tate. I'm just saying they are making an example of him at this period of time. And what's interesting, though, I think, is that the immigrants are being used as a stopgap measure because I think their elimination is also desirable to the elites. They're being used to fill in the temporary position. And I don't believe whites are going to become a pariah in society. I think blacks actually are going to become a pariah in society because just about all the other immigrants hate blacks. And as they accomplish more in the world, I think, or they get more political power, Hispanics and Asians and so forth and so on are all going to turn collectively on the blacks in North America. And it's going to be bad for the blacks, actually. But I think humans by nature are attracted to the lighter. They're naturally attracted to lighter skin, no matter who they are. All humans are attracted to lighter skinned people, or they want to be lighter skinned by nature. And so I think that's an issue, but I do believe that the population is going to be substantially reduced, and how, you know, it's a matter of how much you're worth or how much you're willing to go along with the elites as to how much you're going to survive overall, you know.
Largely, I agree with the majority of what you said. That being more fair-skinned is a more desirable social trait is certainly true in Asia. It's
True in Africa. When I lived in Ghana, they used to sell, until the Ministry of Health outlawed it, skin bleaching creams.
I once did a stream. Believe it or not, there was a courtesan or a prostitute named Freeney during the time of Alexander the Great, and she was a prostitute for like all the top people in Athens in that era, and she was eventually brought to court and charged with some fucking outrageous charge, and she like, her lawyer was not like fucking doing what she wanted to do, and she said basically, fuck it, I'm going to strip. And she stripped she was like 40 plus at this point, so she had technically hit the wall, but her skin was so white and so flawless that the jury decided, yeah, okay, nobody could resist that. You know what I mean? And they set her free. And this is people don't know. I have no idea about who Freeney is, but
This
it's a
is
fantastic
typical Greek
story.
law, isn't it?
What's that?
Does Greek law still work this way?
Possibly, I don't know. I have to go back there and ask them again. I know I tell you this, the fucking Greek security dudes are fucking serious motherfuckers. But anyway, but I don't want to. Don't get me distracted on my latest trip, my only trip outside the United States. But that what Dr. Breck was saying, that being lighter skinned is more desirable. That's true. Like I'm not that friendly or close with black people, okay, but I'm somewhat, in my work interacted with them. And I was in a room one time where everyone there was black, and they were all working. And they thought they were alone. They thought there were no supervisors around, and they thought there was no one, customers waiting. And they were talking in the just relaxed way. And it was, and we're this, and then we're that, and blah 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 blah, light skin this, and charcoal skin that, and blah 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 blah. Unflattering comparisons to non-humans, etc., etc. And then at one point, somebody looked over and they saw me, like I just come in. I'm like driving, like boom, 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 boom. I gotta get this paperwork out. Gotta get this box in this fucking airplane. Gotta get this done. I gotta go to whatever, Delaware, wherever the fuck I was going. Like, you know what I mean? I'm like, I'm like super focused, accomplish this task. And they were like, oh shit, there's a white dude here, and he heard us. And then somebody looked at me and he said, oh, it's Manos. I never, like, and that was that. Not to say that I was friendly with them, but they knew I wouldn't rat them out.
You know about the paper bag test?
You know what I mean? They knew I would not squeal on them. You know what I mean?
You know about the paper bag test?
No, they did not.
There used to be these mulatto clubs in New Orleans, and they put up a lunch paper bag, and your skin had to be lighter than that paper bag to get in.
Yes, that's famous. You know what I mean? Listen, I used to hear a lot of these people that I worked, that the blacks I'm talking about, were black females, and they would talk about so and so. So and so. Oh, he light skinned. Oh, he the light skinned one. No, he not really light skinned. And then they had such subtle gradations in skin tone.
High yellow, red bone, yeah.
Fucking beyond. Like, but around outsiders, that is to say Caucasians like myself, they don't speak this way. You know what I mean? They don't speak when they're amongst themselves. And in this case, what I just described was a time where they thought nobody was in the office, and I came in the office, and they were just relaxed and chatty and laughing and talking and going back and forth and talking shit. And they were like, oh, fuck. Like, not only just an outsider, but a white person. And they were
white outsider, a Greek.
They were like, nah, it's fucking Manos. And listen to me. I'm not saying that they like me. I'm not saying that they approve of my opinions or my worldview or who the fuck I am. But this they know. I'm not a fucking snitch. I'm not going to snitch them out to their supervisors and make them lose their job. Do you know what I mean? They didn't necessarily like me, but they respected me as a person, and they knew that I would not fucking snitch them out. And that's, in terms of intra-racial interactions, that's the best you can possibly hope for. Courtesy and respect. And beyond that, there's nothing like this. It's unrealistic to expect anything else. Even in your own ethnic group.
No, everybody going to join hands and sing Kumbaya, my Lord, Kumbaya.
I think Brazil is going to be very much the model, with a lot of favelas and a lot of rioting and a lot of difficulty, but ultimately firmly under the control of the elite, as we saw recently, wherein even Bolsonaro was afraid to, and the general of the army, the commanding general, were afraid to buck the elites in in the stolen election down there. So I think we're going to model after Brazil. It's going to be bad.
Yeah, I think that's likely. I think we'll move closer and closer to that. Earlier, you mentioned
Maybe
that.
we'll have a cool carnival celebration.
Earlier, you
Dental floss.
just real briefly, Dr. Breck, you mentioned that Asians and Hispanics dislike blacks, and that they will come together to oppose blacks. Arguably, that's already happened in the city of Compton. In the 1990s, Compton, California, was a small city, like 50,000 people. It was a black ghetto, and that's where NWA, Negroes with Attitudes, came from, and Ice Cube and Ice-T and all these guys, and whatever. But aside from that, the demographics in Compton changed from largely African American to largely Hispanic Central American. And the Hispanics and the Central American, whether MS-13 or whatever, were not afraid to use force, right? They didn't wait for state permission to use force. That is to say, they would shoot it out with the African Americans, and they eventually took over the town. Now, the I haven't checked in a while, but the governance, the official elected governance of Compton is largely African American, but the populace that they govern is Hispanic. And it's only a matter of time before the Hispanics figure out, okay, we're going to elect one of our own. We don't care who he is, just put our guy in there. 2 guys in the city council, 5 guys in the city council. The mayor, now he run the whole show.
Hey, Juan, we got a job for you. You're going to be the new mayor. You're not doing anything productive. Go be mayor, Juan.
Well, I would
You're sitting there drinking rum and playing dominoes all day. You can't drink rum and play dominoes your whole life. But but seriously, I'm sorry.
Yeah, inevitably, I think you're right. And what's interesting is that if you saw the picture of the graduating class of the Los Angeles Police Department, it's all Hispanic, not a single white or black person.
I have not. I live in the East Coast. I live in New Jersey.
Well,
so
there was a picture like to illustrate this is the future of Los Angeles. And the blacks, they're not going to tolerate monkey shines. A complete Hispanic LAPD. There's not going to be any monkey shines, so to speak.
The number of people I have known for years that spent time behind bars is probably higher than average. But there was a guy I knew, Anthony V, and he was like an associate. He was not a made guy in the mafia, but he was like an associate, right? And he would shake down construction workers and whatever, this and that. And he ended up being in the MCC, which is called the Manhattan Correctional Center, which in New York City is called the Tombs, because you go in and it's like you go into a tomb, you don't come out forever. But I worked with him. His brother owned a taxi company. And when he got out of jail, when he got out of prison, he was a taxi driver. His brother, obviously his brother hired him. And I would talk with Anthony all the time. And Anthony was a physically short guy. He was not he had a problem with his hip. He was like a little bit of a gimp, and he had been a victim of bullies early on. His father was a New York City police sergeant who never helped him in a street fight. He just left him alone. And because he had like one leg shorter than the other and shit, and his hip was fucked up, he'd get jumped a lot, and he ended up being like the most vicious fucking street fighter you would ever fucking meet. He was a little, bold, short, psychotic fucking Italian who would like literally rip your fucking throat out and drink the blood. At any rate, so he gets pinched for labor, something, whatever. And he also had a lawsuit going where he pretended to do a slip and fall thing, but he ended up losing that because they videoed him smashing people against fucking pickup truck hoods saying, "Pay me." You know what I mean? Hey, your back isn't really injured, Mr. V. You're quite athletic. And he's like, fuck. But anyway, he goes to the MCC, goes Tombs. And every day he plays cards with the guy who was called the Acid Killer, right? And there was a dude in Brooklyn who he didn't really kill people, but he would dissolve their bodies in vats of sulfuric acid. You know what I mean? And he ended up.
He was a janitor,
Yeah,
custodian.
like that. It's sort of like that. But anyway, so
I feel his pain.
This is a real. You can Google this, the Acid Killer, and you'll see who this guy was. Well, anyway, Anthony used to play cards with him every afternoon, and we were talking. He said, "Yeah, you know what? I used to play cards with the Acid Killer," and I said, "Anthony, normal people don't say sentences like that. Like that's not a real. That's normal people don't understand that." He goes, "You don't know him like I do." And it's like, holy fucking shit. Like the gulf, like the enormous gulf of experience and expectations and all many other things, like, oh my fucking God, like, yeah. But that Anthony described life inside. He was a smart kid, like I said. He was not tall and physically gifted. He was short. He had one leg shorter than the other. He had a bunch of fucked up shit. So he had a lot of time to think, and he was miserable because his family wouldn't help him when he got jumped in street fights, and he was more of a thinker than you might imagine. And he was very, very, very observant of the world, very observant of you, your body language, all sorts of shit. And he said that he noticed that there would, like, when he went into MCC, they, of course, phone calls are made, so-and-so's coming in. And then when he came in, right, they let him into the unit. Like, he walks in, you have nothing. You just have your fucking whatever orange jumpsuit. And then somebody hands you an empty, like a big shopping bag, right? And then the first person hands that to you, and they give you a hug and a kiss, right? Like a Mediterranean thing, like a hug and a kiss. And then the next guy gives you a hug and a kiss, and he gives you a bath towel. And the next guy gives you a bathrobe. And the next guy gives you a razor. And the next guy, and you go down this line of people who greet you as soon as you walk into the unit, right? He said, by the time I got to my cell, he said I had fucking 4 shopping bags that looked like it just come back from fucking Macy's on 34th. And that was his welcome to MCC. He says, but the fucking MS-13 guys, he said this, and he was like some little fucking, I want to say the word, some little Spanish dude would come in. He says, and the line of people who would give him combs, hair, fucking gel, everything, razors, like everything, like literally he would have to take trips, 2 and 3 trips to his cell to carry all the gifts they had given him. And this is a visual demonstration that this guy is our guy. You fuck with him, you fuck with us. And you don't want to fuck with us. This is in New York City jails, right? I'm not talking about West Coast jails, Texas jails. I'm not talking about any of that. The power of MS-13 is fucking enormous inside. How much power they have outside is probably just as much. But there are worlds people do not see and don't know exists. And part of being the video game generation is only believing what's on the screen in front of you and not understanding there are deeper motivations and more binding ties that drive behavior. This in terms of demographics for blacks, there was just a thing, they were like crying about reparations. Listen to me, they're not getting reparations. The only way blacks get reparations in America is if a certain chosen elite skim 85% off the top of that. You know what I mean? That's you know who I'm talking about, right? The sports agents, wink, wink, the fucking stockbrokers, whatever you want to call them. Like the only way Black America, who was never slaves, gets reparations from white America, who were never slave owners. But the way that transfer happens in the Treasury is if along the way, sticky fingers grab the majority of that And that's the fucking truth.
Absolutely. I would agree with you that any kind of reparations would just be a money laundering scheme, basically. But
Right.
that being said, I'm going to have to bow out.
All right.
Otto,
Thank you very much for coming on.
it was an
And I've got
honor.
a link here at the bottom to your book here, published by Nine Banded Press. Is it still available from the publisher?
I think it's out of print, but you can obtain copies on Amazon. I'm not sure. Give Chip some money. Chip needs your money. Whatever books are bought will go to the proceeds will go to Chip to make up for his loss. He lost money printing my book, so please help him out. He deserves it, and it was an honor to be on the show. I appreciate you having me on,
Oh, no problem. Thanks a lot for coming.
and I will be getting your
Right.
book.
Cheers.
And it was
All right.
good meeting you as well, James. We'll have
All
a
right.
good one, gentlemen.
All right, so it's been over 2 hours. Thank you very much, Dr. Breck and James. And the next show I'm going to be doing for sure is 14th of February. Lena Wolf will be back. And I think her graphic novel should be done by then. All right, so it's late for me because I usually am in bed by this time. So I will see everybody the 14th of February, hopefully, if not before then. Thanks a lot, James. I'll see everybody later.
Good night, Jonathan. Take
Good night.
care.